Right, good morning and welcome to yet another edition of Elevenses. It's a reasonably bright morning here in London, a bit windy. Weather's been a bit changeable over the last few days, I'm sure you've noticed, but still not too bad for biking, which is good news. What have we got for you this morning? Well, the news is that driving tests are finally given the go-ahead. So we will cover, I'll have a look at that in a moment. I'll have a quick look at an electric motorcycle sharing scheme that's launched in Rome. There is news of the latest developments from Norton, which says that the ex-boss, Stuart Garner, acted recklessly and dishonestly. We'll have a look at that. MOTs are down by 5 million and we'll consider implications. And I've got an item on planning a sort of a COVID-19 aware holiday, which I hope you'll find interesting. Okay, so don't forget, you're watching Kevin Williams here with the Elevenses show, and my screen's all crooked at the back there. I'll just try and straighten that up a bit. If you've got a question, a comment, anything you'd like to cover on one of these shows at any point, drop me a line and I'll do my best to answer it for you. Always interested in feedback on anything I talk about. So, again, you can use the comment stream to add a question or anything you want to say, and I'll get back to you at the end of the show. Okay, so what's going on in the world? Well, the big news is that motorcycle tests and car tests in England have the go-ahead. The DVSA, the Driving Vehicle Standards Agency, have confirmed that powered two-wheeler testing and training can resume. As of this morning, announcements are still being awaited from the devolved administrations of Scotland, Wales and Northern Ireland. So I don't know the full details for that. I do know that the DVA Northern Ireland have announced that there will be a phased return for driving tests and MOTs, but I don't have any details of that. So what's happening in England? Well, the announcement was made by the leader of the House, Jacob Rees-Mogg, at lunchtime on Thursday, and he was responding to a question from Greg Smith, who's the MP for Buckingham, and he announced a phased approach, and there will inevitably be some questions about how this will go ahead. Basically, this is how it's going to work. Rider, driver and vocational training, including CBT, can all resume from Saturday the 4th of July. Now, it may not have escaped your notice that that happens to be the US Independence Day. So you can expect some cheesy headlines to go with that from the motorcycle press. Theory tests will also resume in England on Saturday the 4th of July, with the announcement said social distancing measures in place to help stop the spread of coronavirus. The Enhanced Rider Scheme trainer theory test will also restart on the 4th of July, although I would have thought that the priority would have been given to getting new riders through the system rather than actually qualifying motorcycle trainers to run the Enhanced Rider Scheme. How will riders with cancelled or, as the DSA are describing them, suspended tests get booked back in? Well, this is slightly confusing because everything's kind of been lumped together, but car tests and bike tests aren't quite the same, because most motorcycle tests are actually booked by the ATB on behalf of the trainee. So the statement says that the DVSA will be contacting anyone who has a scheduled test to let them know what will happen next. They'll email them at a later date to invite them to book a test at a time and location that's convenient. Now, what's not clear is whether those whose cancelled tests were booked directly by an ATB will be invited to rebook their tests personally, or whether it will be the ATBs who get the alert to reschedule the test. I simply don't know the answers to that, and nothing in the information that I've received makes that clear. But what I can imagine is if the candidates themselves get the alert to rebook their own tests, And then the ATBs have to work around tests that the trainees have booked and try and fit their own training and their tests that they're booking for new clients in with all that. I can imagine that'll be a horrible, horrible mess. On July the 6th, with that in mind, the trainer booking service reopens. And what it says there is that initially the test will be reserved for critical workers and anyone with a suspended test. New candidates will therefore only be processed through the system once the DVSA has carried out the tests reserved for those other groups. But again, quite how long that'll take, how long they'll reserve space for people with suspended tests and critical workers before they open the tests up to everybody else is anybody's guess. That's not known. And of course, what will happen? Will all the test slots be filled by people with suspended tests or with a critical worker status? What will they do if they've got spare tests? Will they open those up at random? Who knows? But what I can confidently predict is that the telephone lines will be jammed, and the website is likely to creak under the weight of schools trying to deal with their own backlog of training and testing requirements. So it'll be very interesting to see how that happens. Now, next stage is that the tests themselves for motorcycles alone will resume on July the 13th. Car testing resumes later on the 22nd of July. Now, this phased approach is considered to give learners time to have refresher lessons and to practice before taking their test, which is fair enough. But it's not quite clear why the motorcycles should resume so much earlier. Again, are they going to put car instructor resources or examiner resources rather over to conducting motorcycle tests? Because a lot of motorcycle instructors test for cars as well, not just for motorcycles. So will those examiners actually focus entirely on getting motorcycle tests done? If they do, expect to see a lot of motorcycle tests done with a car pursuing the motorcycle. It's not unknown, it's quite common in fact, and it's perfectly legit. And you do have a motorcycle examiner. A lot of riders suspect they're getting a car examiner, but it really is the guy who normally would do it on a motorcycle, just haven't got enough motorcycles. Look, more questions in some ways, and there are answers there. The DVSA's chief exec, Gareth Llewellyn, he said it's been vital that lessons and tests only resume when safe to do so and in line with the government's advice, which rather begs the question, of course, as to why driving lessons, theory tests and driving tests are all still suspended in Scotland and Wales, along with guidance from their own devolved administrations. There's clearly not full unanimity now between the administrations. I note the statement that says safety measures will be put in place to protect learners and examiners from COVID-19, and information on how to implement these measures will be published in due course. So obviously that is still up for debate, even though it's now months since we locked down. They haven't actually got a system ready to give to driver and rider trainers. So I would suggest that if you're running an ATB or even you're just a bike trainer, you head over and take a look at the Driving Instructors Association to find out what they're doing. They have actually got a post-lockdown training toolkit available to members, and it covers a number of topics such as infection control and safe training protocols, a risk assessment framework, how to get back to business after COVID-19, some information on PPE, a risk management assessment, a check sheet, which is quite a useful little one, and some guidance on resuming lessons, which is for the pupils themselves. The risk assessment check sheet, for example, suggests 2 simple steps, which even bike trainers will need to take, even though bike trainers are considering themselves more socially distanced than car trainers. But for example, they suggest that you establish the health of the trainee 24 hours before the course, and then you repeat that health check 1 hour before the course by sort of avoiding having to make unnecessary journeys. So I'd hope a responsible ATB owner, motorcycle training school owner, would be carrying out those steps anyway. But if you are a motorcycle trainer yourself, or even a trainee who's looking to go to an ATB to get qualified, I would be thinking very carefully about how you're going to protect yourself. You need to be a member to download the toolkit, but honestly, I would advise you, if you are a trainer, to head over there, particularly if you have any kind of underlying health issues yourself, or you are of a certain age. Make your own assessments of the risk. Don't rely on the employer to sort it out solely for you. Right, okay, what have we still got to come? Well, you're watching Elevenses here with Kevin Williams of Survival Skills Rider Training. We're going to look at the electric motorcycle sharing in Rome, Stuart Garner and Norton, the implication of 5 million less MOTs, and planning a COVID-19 aware holiday. So, okay. I have a little picture for you somewhere. Where is it? Let's just flick over to it, and where's my picture gone? There it is. Hang on. There, I got there at last. Right, that is the Acciona company's electric motorcycle, a scooter, obviously, and they have just announced that they've opened up a new centre of operations in Rome, and initially they're going to be putting 500 of these electric scooters on the streets of the capital of Italy. They launched originally in October 2018. They are Spanish based, and they've become the world's largest operator of electric shared motorcycles, and they've got 10,000 of these red and white scooters in 5 Spanish cities, and they've also got them in Lisbon and Milan. So the system, as you can see, runs from an app very similar to the cycle rental schemes. So what you would do is download the app. It takes around 24 hours for the app to be activated as your own details are validated, and then you simply use the app to track down the nearest bike that you want to rent on that map, and then you can either press to book it or just check its status. One slight possibility here is that could cause a few problems is it's only reserved for 15 minutes. Well, given the size of the average city, you must be almost on top of it before you can get to it, which does kind of rather beg the question if you're coming in from, I don't know, some other, say Turin or something, and traveling to Rome, and you want to book ahead. You wouldn't be able to. Anyway, having reached the bike, you can then start it up via the app. It appears that there's a helmet under the seat, and the only constraint on use is that you must finish the trip and park at a designated area. You can't simply abandon it when you get to your destination like a bicycle. To work within the coronavirus problem at the moment, Acciona have said they'll equip all bikes with hand gel, disinfectant wipes, and helmet nets. Though I have to say I would be reluctant to use a shared helmet, not just because of the CV business, but for the fit. What does it cost? Well, it's between 0.29 euros and 0.4 euros per minute to use the bikes, and anybody with a car or motorcycle license can use them. I'm still not entirely convinced. Until you can actually pick these things up outside city centres and ride in, and then obviously ride back out of city centres, they're really not a full substitute for public transport. Same problem as I was saying with the rented e-bikes and e-scooter schemes. They're quite expensive too. It takes me around 30 minutes to ride my own motorcycle into central London from here, and if I was renting, that would cost me around €12 or about £10. That's more than the tube by some margin, and my fuel costs are around £1. Now, okay, I have to factor in insurance, other costs like purchasing the bike and so on, but there's still a significant cost gap. And maybe that's acceptable for the odd one-off trip, but if you're going to make a real dent in private ownership, I really think the cost of these things has to come down fairly dramatically. Okay, so just a reminder, you're watching Kevin Williams here on Survival Skills and the Elevenses show. If you fancy reading something about motorcycling, you can head over to my Lulu site and check out my books over there. They're available as paperbacks to order, and there is also a couple of downloads which you can get instantly in EPUB format. I'm still going to be looking at MOT numbers, and we'll be looking at COVID-19 and holidaying. But let's move on to what's happening at Norton. Now, as you recall from previous webcasts, it's been quite a long-running saga since the administrators were called in back in January of this year, when Metro Bank froze Norton's accounts because of £3 million worth of debts. And what's become obvious is that the bike business was hit by a catalogue of problems. There were concerns raised by the auditors at its last set of accounts. There was a High Court case involving HMRC over hundreds of thousands of pounds of tax that was owed. And what's emerged over the few months since those investigations started is really quite an alarming series of stories of wrongdoings, which culminated in revelations that the pension schemes had been raided to keep the company afloat. And the latest, the investigation by the pension ombudsman now says that the ex-boss of Norton, Stuart Garner, had acted recklessly and dishonestly with those millions. He was trustee of the schemes. He was also a sole director of Norton Motorcycle Holdings at the time. And basically the conclusion is a pretty sorry list. He was said to have acted dishonestly and in breach of his duty of no conflict and his duty not to profit from the schemes. He's breached statutory investment and trust law duties. He failed to have adequate controls to manage conflicts of interest and ensure the effective management of these schemes. He didn't have the right knowledge or understanding of the law relating to pensions and trusts. He was guilty of maladministration, and he appointed someone in February 2019 who to act as a contact for scheme members who'd been jailed for tax fraud. Anthony Arter, the pension ombudsman, he said, "I find that the trustee, that is Stuart Garner, his maladministration has caused an exceptional level of distress and inconvenience to the applicants, preventing them from making important life decisions over a prolonged period, such as retiring from their occupations, and I shall direct that the trustee makes a payment to the applicants of an amount which recognises the level of distress and inconvenience which they have suffered." And he went on to add that Mr. Garner, no doubt in his executive capacity, will have knowledge and awareness of the news and reaction in 1995 to Robert Maxwell misappropriating monies from his companies and their pension plans to finance his corporate expansion. This was well publicised to all persons, whether pension trustees or otherwise. And he continues, "In my judgment, this is general blunting of his moral antennae, which explains why the trustee has a lower standard of honesty as well as his recklessness for others' rights." Okay, and basically concludes that scheme members' funds have not only been lost in their entirety, but members have also missed out on investment growth that they might have benefited from. Garner, who acquired Norton back in 2008, said he believed that people who invested millions in the pension schemes connected to the business could yet receive all their money back. Well, it'd be interesting to see where he finds that cash from. Norton is, of course, now in the hands of new owners. Okay, so don't forget, you can set a reminder to watch Elevenses. We are running these shows now Wednesdays and Sundays at 11. And if you miss them live, you can always catch up on Facebook at any time, or you can head over to my YouTube channel and you can view them over there. Right, so we're going to finish off with planning a CV19 aware holiday, but let's carry on with the MOT story. Now, it seems that 5 million fewer drivers, don't know about motorcycle owners, but 5 million fewer cars were taken in for an MOT in April and May. And that, of course, is because of the extension in the MOT lifetime by the government, gave them 6 months extra. The research came from motorway.co.uk, which is a car selling comparison site, and they made a freedom of information request to the DVSA. And basically they found that there were just over 2.15 million tests carried out, which between March 30th, when the extension became active, and to the end of May. Normally, there would be over 7 million tests carried out in that period, so about 70% down on the previous year. That doesn't mean every driver will actually make full use of the 6 months extension. The indications are only about 1 in 7 drivers will stretch it the full 6 months. And test numbers, in fact, were up in May, although still down on the previous year. The thing is, of course, that people have been saying that whilst these were intended originally to help frontline workers and people in need of food and medicines for vehicles and things, continued delivery, concerns have been raised about drivers keeping unfit cars on the road, and that there is a requirement, even if an MOT is still valid, for the car to be roadworthy. So it's almost predictable. Some people start claiming that it could release unsafe vehicles onto the road. Garage chain Quick Fit, for example, suggested that they thought 1 million unroadworthy vehicles could now be on the roads. Halfords are equally keen to point out that as many of us have our vehicles serviced at the same time as the MOT, which could flag up mechanical and safety issues that urgently need to be addressed, then again, there would be unfit vehicles on the road. But it begs the question, all these claims, about how many vehicles have actually been used since lockdown in March. Due to the continuing sort of work from home and the school shutdown and home food deliveries and all the things that have changed since March, I doubt the average vehicle is close to covering the number of miles that it would have done in the same period last year. My camper, for example, has not actually moved since late March. My partner's car's done a fraction of the usual miles it has. Most of those is because she's doing voluntary food deliveries. And my training bike, which would normally be covering about £1,000 miles plus a month, possibly as high as 1,500 a month, has covered just on 500 since lockdown. So, I'm way under normal mileage. So, how do vehicles that aren't being used suddenly become dangerous? I don't really know. It doesn't actually work on a calendar basis. It's actually usage which wears things up. Of course, if you have been using vehicle as normal, then it does make sense to at least adhere to your normal service schedule, and that should fix any faults that would result in an MOT failure. But it's hard to see how a stationary vehicle is suddenly high risk. So I do feel that's a bit of a scare story being put around by the people who actually would normally benefit from selling MOTs and doing the repairs that would validate a faulty MOT. Right, okay, so on to my last story of the day. Don't forget, if you are enjoying the show, you can always consider supporting me over on coffee.com, where I've been busily putting up a lot of content over the last few days. There's already 100 plus stories from 2014 and 2015 have gone up. I've been busy updating those, and there are some free ones there for you to sample just to see what it's all about. But if you go over there and support me for £3, that gives you access for 30 days. And as somebody said the other day, 10p a day, it's cheap at the price. So do pop over, and there's all the back articles that I've written on Facebook over the years. Okay, so last one of the day then. If you're planning a holiday, and many people are, somebody contacted me the other day and in one of the comments on Facebook and said we're off on holiday in July, and great if you are, but I think we're all going to need to think very flexibly. Now, we're currently coming out of the more restrictive stages of lockdown, and we're starting to get excited about the return of some freedoms we haven't had since March. And that's why, of course, people are starting to think about heading abroad on holiday. But just as the UK is easing measures, it's important to realise that there are warning signs of an uptick in coronavirus in other parts of Europe, which we may not be fully aware of because our news over here is pretty UK-centric. And a couple of popular holiday destinations have reported these upsurges in recent days. Now, the first one is in Aragon in Spain, where around 60 7,000 residents have been forced to move backwards in a phase of the de-escalation plan due to fresh outbreaks of the virus. And that actually happened on Monday. And that was just a day after the entire country entered what had been dubbed the new normality, which has followed the country's prolonged and staged recovery process. So whilst the rest of the country went forwards, this particular area in Aragon went backwards. The reversion, I should say, to the tougher lockdown measures only affects a small area in the northeast of the country, but it is the first place in Spain to reintroduce restrictions. Spain was, as you'll probably remember, one of the hardest hit countries by the pandemic, and the official death toll was over 28,000, although again there's an excess deaths figure which has been calculated to exceed 43,000. And the health authorities have pointed out that although the outbreak is relatively small, it's important to address, because if they don't, they say, we run the risk of losing control over community transmission. Spain's health minister said that the situation in Aragon is being closely monitored and the outbreak is on its way to being under control. It's not entirely in agreement with other information from the local authority. I'll talk about that in just a second. But this is just one of 12 outbreaks which have been detected across Spain, and they include outbreaks in Madrid, Catalonia, and the Canaries. Again, the authorities believe they've been contained, but the one they've got the greatest concern with is this one in Aragon. There are 50 known cases, and the local authorities are expecting to see a significant rise in positive diagnoses. Under the phase 2 restrictions, which have been reimposed, there aren't no checks on mobility, which implies that if you're a visitor, you can come and go to that area. And that's because the widespread restriction of movement was part of emergency powers that the national government created for themselves, which expired on Sunday. So the local authorities cannot impose a mobility ban. However, they have said that citizens within the area should limit their trip to and from the zone, and presumably that would include visitors too. And they have warned that if the situation does get worse, they could consider asking central government for more restrictive powers. A public health law can apparently be used to confine a small local area without the need for a national state of alarm. What else is being done? Well, food and drink venues, for example, as well as retail stores, are also restricted in what they can do. They can only operate at 40% capacity. Nightclubs are closed, children's playgrounds are closed, and swimming pools are also only able to open to a third of capacity. So there are some fairly significant restrictions there, and that could affect you if you're considering going to those areas as a guest, a holidayer. So think about, I think basically what we're going to have to do is actually look at a map and see what's open, what isn't, and then plan our route and keep an ear on the news as well, because we may have to change things very quickly. If you're getting locked down somewhere and unable to move because you're quarantined, that could be quite serious, because this is what's happened in Switzerland. They have ordered 300 people into quarantine because of what's been called a super spreader outbreak at a Zurich nightclub. And what they said is that somebody who'd been at the Flamingo Club in Zurich had tested positive on Thursday. 5 people who were with him there have also been tested, and they also tested positive. And this was all reported on Friday. And they've now got a guest list from the club, and the authorities have been able to contact these people, and they've all been ordered into quarantine for 10 days in order to try and stop the spread of the virus. And the Swiss authorities are saying it shows how important it is to stick to hygiene and distance regulations as lockdown measures are eased. They say that if these super spreader events continue to happen, they will have to resort to closing facilities like that again. Like other European countries, Switzerland has drastically reduced the number of new infections, but it too is starting to see a slight uptick as it tries to restart the economy. In the latest reports on Sunday last week, they reported 69 new cases overnight from Friday to Saturday. That makes 31,000 cases for Switzerland, with 1,681 deaths. What the implication for holidays is that, it's going to be difficult to book a long term ahead. And I would suggest it's also fairly risky to do things, the sort of things that people like to do on holidays, like go to nightclubs and big resorts. I can't tell you how you're going to run your life, but I do think, we need to take it seriously. We can't assume that everything is back to normal. It might be easy to jump on the bike and be socially distanced while they're on the bike, but soon, of course, as you stop and you interact with the local population, there's the risks of spreading again. All right, okay, so there we are at the end of today's show. Don't forget, drop me a line if you've got anything to say. I can see a few comments there waiting for me. We'll be back with the next one on Wednesday at 11. So again, once more, thank you very much for watching, and have a good day and enjoy the rest of your weekend. Bye for now.